The dust settled on the main street of Redemption Creek as Grace Jennings clutched her shawl tighter around her swollen belly, the whispers following her like shadows as she made her way to the general store. It was 1875 in the Montana Territory, and an unmarried woman with child was as welcome as a rattlesnake in a church pew. Once respected as the schoolteacher, she now faced turned backs and hushed condemnation, but she lifted her chin despite the tears threatening to spill. "Ain't you got no shame, Miss Jennings?" Martha Wilson's shrill voice cut through the morning air, "parading around decent folk with your condition." Grace's fingers trembled as she reached for the door handle. 6 months pregnant and abandoned by a man who'd promised the world only to disappear with the spring cattle drive, leaving nothing but memories and a child growing inside her. The boarding house where she'd lived had given her 2 more weeks before she'd be homeless as well as ruined. "I need flour and sugar, Mrs. Wilson, same as anyone else," Grace replied, her voice steadier than her heart. "Well, you ain't getting it here. We don't serve your kind." The word stung like a physical blow, your kind. As if motherhood without marriage had transformed her into something less than human. "My money's good as anyone's," Grace insisted, though her meager savings were dwindling faster than the creek in August. "Don't matter. You're not welcome." A shadow fell across the porch and both women turned. Quentin Drake stood there, trail dust still clinging to his denim pants and the leather vest he wore over a faded blue shirt. His broad-brimmed hat shadowed eyes the color of a summer storm, and the badge pinned to his vest caught the morning light. "That's so, Martha." His voice was quiet but carried the weight of authority that came with being the town's deputy sheriff. "Seems to me the store's open to the public. This is my establishment, Deputy Drake, and I choose who to serve." Quentin's gaze shifted to Grace, lingering briefly on her belly before returning to her face with surprising gentleness. "Miss Jennings, Deputy," she nodded, wishing the ground would open and swallow her whole. "I was just leaving," she murmured, turning away. "Wait." His hand caught her elbow, not roughly but firmly enough to stop her. "I need supplies too. Maybe we could combine our shopping lists." Martha's mouth pinched into a tight line as Quentin guided Grace inside. The whispers of 2 women examining fabric by the window followed them down the aisle. "Don't need to do this, Deputy," Grace said softly. "You'll only dirty your reputation standing near me." Quentin's laugh was a low rumble that made something warm unfurl in Grace's chest. "My reputation's survived worse, I reckon." They gathered the items on Grace's list: flour, sugar, coffee, and a few other necessities, and Quentin added his own supplies. When they reached the counter, Martha glared at them both. "That'll be $3.45, she snapped. Grace opened her small purse, but Quentin's hand covered hers. "I've got it." "I can't let you consider it a welcome-back gift. Heard you're returning to teaching." Grace blinked in surprise. "Who told you that?" "Mayor mentioned it yesterday. Said the children miss you." "The school board dismissed me when they learned of my situation." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Quentin paid for their goods, ignoring Martha's disapproving glare. Outside, he loaded the packages into Grace's small wagon, boards reconsidering. "Turns out finding qualified teachers willing to come to a place like Redemption Creek ain't easy." Hope fluttered in Grace's chest, but she tamped it down. "The parents won't stand for it." "Some won't," he agreed. "Others are more practical. School's been closed 3 weeks now. Families with both parents working need somewhere for their young'uns to go." He helped her onto the wagon seat and handed her the reins. As she settled them in her hands, he looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Folks'll talk about you and that baby, Miss Jennings. But they'll talk less if you've got work and can support yourself proper-like." "Why are you helping me, Deputy Drake?" His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Maybe I believe everyone deserves a second chance, even those who ain't done nothing wrong to begin with." With that cryptic statement, he tipped his hat and stepped back, watching as she guided the wagon down the dusty street toward the small cabin she'd rented on the edge of town with the last of her savings. That night, Grace sat by the window, a hand resting on her rounded belly as she felt the baby kick. The encounter with Deputy Drake played through her mind. In the 3 months since Thomas Bennett had left town promising to return once he'd made his fortune in the gold fields, no one had shown her a scrap of kindness. A knock at the door startled her. Night visitors were rare even before her fall from grace. She approached cautiously, lamp in hand. "Who's there, Deputy Drake, madam?" She opened the door to find him standing on her porch, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No, madam, just bringing news. School board met this afternoon, voted to reinstate you starting Monday." Joy surged through her, followed immediately by wariness. Why the change of heart? Mayor Hargrove's wife reminded him that their youngest still can't read properly, and Mrs. Peterson pointed out that her husband's general store has lost business with the school closed, as families aren't coming to town as often. Grace couldn't help but laugh. "So commerce trumps morality in Redemption Creek. Ain't that the truth everywhere?" His smile was genuine, lighting up his weathered face. "There are conditions, though." Her heart sank. "Of course. You'll teach until the baby comes, then take 2 weeks to recover. During that time, Mrs. Peterson will substitute after that." "After that, what?" "That's where it gets complicated. Board says you can return to teaching only if you have proper arrangements for the child. They don't want a baby in the schoolhouse." Grace's mind raced. "With no family and few friends who would care for her child while she taught, I see." Her voice was small. "Thank you for telling me." Quentin shifted his weight, looking down at his boots before meeting her eyes again. "I might have a solution if you're willing to hear me out." Grace gestured toward the small kitchen table, and they sat across from each other, the lamp between them casting shadows on his face. "My sister Alina lives on my ranch. She lost her husband and baby to fever 2 years back. She's been helping me run things, but—" He paused, seemingly collecting his thoughts. "She's good with children, Mrs. Caring for her own. Might be an arrangement beneficial to you both." Grace stared at him. "You'd open your home to me and my child, a woman the town considers fallen." His expression hardened slightly. "Don't much care what the town thinks, never have." "Why would you do this?" Quentin was silent for a long moment. "Because I've seen how this town treats those who don't fit their notion of proper, because that child deserves a chance, same as any other, and because—" He hesitated. "Because I know what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control." There was something in his voice, a hint of old pain that resonated with Grace's own situation. Still, suspicion lingered. "What would you expect in return, Deputy Drake?" His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as understanding dawned. "Nothing like that, Miss Jennings. It would be a business arrangement. You'd have your own cabin on the property. Alina would watch the child while you teach. In exchange, you could help Alina with reading and writing in the evenings. She never had much schooling." It sounded too good to be true, and in Grace's experience, such offers usually were. Yet there was something about Quentin Drake's steady gaze that made her want to trust him. "I'll consider it," she said finally. He nodded, rising to his feet. "That's all I ask. School starts Monday. You have until then to decide." After he left, Grace sat for a long time, hands resting on her belly, feeling the occasional flutter of movement from the life within. It wasn't just her future at stake anymore. Every decision she made would affect her child as well. Monday morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill. Grace stood before her classroom, heart pounding as 20 children stared at her with curious eyes. Some parents had kept their children home, but more had sent them, necessity overcoming moral objections. "Good morning, class," she began, voice stronger than she felt. "Good morning, Miss Jennings," they chorused, though several pairs of eyes were fixed on her swollen belly. "Today we'll begin with Miss Jennings." A small hand rose in the back. "Yes, Samuel. Ma says you're having a baby without being married. Is that true?" The classroom fell silent. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks but squared her shoulders. These children deserved honesty, delivered appropriately. "Yes, Samuel, I am having a baby." "But how? That's not a discussion for school," she interrupted gently. "Now, please open your readers to page 15. The day passed without further incidents, though Grace noticed several children whispering when they thought she wasn't looking. By afternoon, exhaustion tugged at her limbs, her back aching from standing. As she dismissed the class, she spotted Quentin Drake leaning against the hitching post outside, seemingly casual but watchful. The children streamed past him, several boys greeting him enthusiastically. "Deputy Drake," she acknowledged when the last child had gone. "Miss Jennings." "How was your first day back?" "Exhausting but successful." No parents stormed in to remove their children, at least. His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Give them time." Grace gathered her belongings, locking the schoolhouse door behind her. "Have you come for my answer?" "If you're ready to give it." She had spent the weekend weighing her options, which were painfully few. The boarding house would evict her soon. Her savings would barely last a month. The baby would arrive in winter, the worst possible time to be without secure shelter. "I accept your offer, Deputy Drake, but I insist on contributing cooking meals, teaching your sister whatever else might be needed." Relief softened his features. "That's fair. I'll bring the wagon tomorrow after school to move your things." "So soon?" "Mrs. Harrison already has another boarder lined up for your room. Seems she's been eager to be rid of you." The blunt assessment stung, though Grace knew it was accurate. "Very well, tomorrow then." That night, packing her meager possessions, Grace wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. She knew little about Quentin Drake beyond his reputation as a fair-minded deputy and his evident kindness toward her. His ranch lay 5 miles outside town, far enough that daily travel to the school would be challenging as her pregnancy advanced. Yet what choice did she have? Without the teaching position, she faced destitution. Without childcare, she couldn't keep teaching. The baby kicked as if offering an opinion on the matter. "I know," she murmured, rubbing her belly, "but we need to be practical now." True to his word, Quentin arrived the following afternoon with a wagon. He loaded her trunk and 2 small bags with ease that spoke of physical strength hidden beneath his lean frame. "Is this everything?" he asked, surveying the pile. "Yes, I've never been one for possessions." The journey to the Drake Ranch passed mostly in silence. As they crested a hill, Grace caught her breath at the view. A substantial log house stood in a clearing, smoke curling from its chimney. A smaller cabin sat nearby with a barn and corral beyond. The setting sun gilded everything in gold, and mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Been in the family since my father came west, built it up over the years." Pride colored his voice. A woman emerged from the main house as they approached, tall and angular, with Quentin's same storm-gray eyes but hair several shades lighter than his dark brown. She watched their approach with a wary expression. "This is my sister, Eleanor," Quentin said as he helped Grace down from the wagon. "Eleanor, Miss Grace Jennings." Eleanor nodded coolly. "Deputy says you'll be staying in the extra cabin, that you're in need of help with your situation." Grace felt her spine stiffen. "I'm in need of childcare once the baby arrives, yes. In exchange, I understand you might appreciate some assistance with reading and writing." A flush colored Eleanor's cheeks. "I read just fine." "Eleanor," Quentin's voice held a note of warning, his sister's expression softened slightly. "The cabin needs airing out. I've put fresh linens on the bed and stocked the pantry with basics. You'll take supper with us tonight." It wasn't the warmest welcome, but Grace hadn't expected one. "Thank you, that's very kind." The cabin proved larger than Grace had anticipated, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen. The furniture was simple but sturdy, and everything was scrupulously clean. "Eleanor's been preparing it for days," Quentin said, setting down her trunk. "Though she'd never admit to the effort. It's wonderful, more than I expected. It was my parents' first home when they settled here. After they built the main house, it served as a bunkhouse for ranch hands, been empty since the war when we had to reduce the operation." Grace ran her hand over a quilt folded at the foot of the bed. "You fought," he nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Union cavalry, came back in '65 to find my father dead and the ranch struggling. Eleanor's husband managed things while I was gone, but after he passed." He shrugged. "We've kept it going, the two of us. No wife for you." The question slipped out before Grace could stop it. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." A small smile touched his lips. No wife, never found the right woman willing to take on a rancher with more scars than prospects. There was something in his tone that suggested the scars weren't all visible. Before Grace could respond, Eleanor called from outside that supper was ready. The meal was better than anything Grace had eaten in months: venison stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Conversation remained polite but stilted, with Eleanor answering Grace's attempts at friendliness with monosyllables. "The stew is delicious," Grace offered. "Quinn brought down the deer last week," Eleanor replied, using what was evidently a family nickname for her brother. "You hunt often?" Quentin nodded. "When necessary, prefer raising cattle, but game helps stretch supplies through winter." "Do you sell your cattle in Redemption Creek?" "Drive them to Helena mostly. Better prices." As Eleanor served the pie, Grace noticed her struggling to read the label on a jar of cream. "Would you like me to start the reading lessons tomorrow evening?" Grace asked gently. Eleanor's face flushed deep red. "I told Quinn I read well enough." "Eleanor's always been proud," Quentin explained, "but she knows her letters need work." "Just because I didn't have fancy schooling doesn't make me simple," Eleanor snapped. "No one thinks you're simple," Grace said. "Reading is a skill like any other. Some people learn young, others later. There's no shame in it," says the woman carrying a bastard child. "Eleanor." Quentin slammed his hand on the table. Grace rose slowly. "Thank you for supper. I think I'll retire now." She left before either sibling could respond, walking carefully back to her cabin. The autumn night had grown cold, and she wrapped her shawl tightly around herself. Inside, she lit the lamp and fire that Quentin had prepared earlier, then sat in the rocking chair beside the hearth, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. A knock sounded at the door a short time later. Wiping her eyes, Grace called, "Come in." Quentin entered, carrying a steaming mug. Eleanor's apple cider, and her apology, though she couldn't bring herself to deliver it in person. Grace accepted the mug. She doesn't need to apologize for speaking the truth. Truth or not, it wasn't kind. He hesitated, then sat in the chair opposite hers. "My sisters had a hard life. Lost her husband and child within a week of each other. Fever took them fast. She's been different since then." "Grief changes people," Grace said softly. "I understand that better than most." His eyes studied her face. "You've lost someone, my parents, 3 years ago. Wagon accident on the mountain pass." She sipped the cider, letting its warmth spread through her. "I came west to start fresh. Teaching seemed a good way to support myself. And the baby's father," Grace stiffened. "That's not something I wish to discuss," he nodded, accepting her boundary. "Fair enough. Just know that whatever your past, you have a place here for as long as you need it." "Why?" The question that had been nagging at her since his offer burst forth. "Why help me, a woman you barely know?" Quentin was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "During the war, I saw men do terrible things, and good things too. Learned that character isn't about circumstances but choices. You're choosing to keep your child to work, to face a town that scorns you. That tells me something about your character. And Eleanor, will she ever accept me?" "Give her time. She's prickly but fair at heart." He rose, moving toward the door. "Rest well, Miss Jennings. I'll drive you to town for school in the morning." After he left, Grace sat by the fire until it burned down to embers. For the first time in months, she felt something like hope stirring in her heart, not just for herself but for her child. Days turned into weeks as autumn deepened toward winter. Grace found a rhythm to her new life, teaching during the day, sharing evening meals at the main house, and offering reading lessons to Eleanor 3 nights a week. The older woman's initial hostility gradually softened, especially as she began making progress with her letters. "Never thought I'd manage this," Eleanor admitted one evening, tracing her finger under a sentence she'd just read aloud from a simple book. "You're a quick study," Grace replied. "Your comprehension is excellent. You just needed someone to show you the patterns." Eleanor glanced at Grace's belly, now quite prominent at 7 months. "How much longer do you reckon?" 2 months, give or take. The baby should arrive just after New Year's. "We should prepare some things. Baby clothes, diapers." Eleanor's voice had lost its earlier judgment. "I still have some things from before. They're packed away, but they're good quality." Grace felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected offer. That would be very kind, thank you. Later that night, as Quentin walked her back to her cabin, a courtesy he insisted on despite her protests that she could manage the short distance, Grace mentioned his sister's change of heart. Told you she'd come around, he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Eleanor judges quick but fair. She's seen how hard you work. It means a lot. I've been worried about the baby's arrival, about having what's needed. They reached her door and Grace turned to bid him good night when a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her belly. Quentin's hands steadied her immediately. What's wrong? Just a twinge. The doctor in town said it's normal at this stage. The pain receded, leaving her breathless but relieved. False labor, he called it. Concern etched lines around Quentin's eyes. Should I fetch Eleanor? No need. It's past now, she straightened, embarrassed by her reaction. I'm fine, truly. He studied her face intently, then nodded. If you're certain, but if it happens again tonight, bang on the wall, my bedroom's on the other side. The knowledge that he slept so close brought a flutter to Grace's stomach that had nothing to do with the baby. Over the weeks, she had grown increasingly aware of Quentin Drake as a man, his quiet strength, the gentle way he handled both people and animals, his unexpected humor that emerged in private moments. I will, she promised. Good night, Deputy. A smile tugged at his mouth. Might be time to call me Quentin, considering we're sharing a wall. Good night, Quentin, she amended, enjoying the way his name felt on her lips. As winter settled over the land, bringing snow and bitter winds, Grace found herself increasingly grateful for the sanctuary of the Drake Ranch. The daily trips to town became more challenging, with Quentin insisting on driving her in the enclosed buggy rather than the open wagon. Can't have our teacher arriving half frozen, he said one morning as he tucked a heated brick wrapped in flannel by her feet. Our teacher. She queried, noting the possessive. He ducked his head slightly. Figure of speech. But there was something in his tone that suggested otherwise, a sense of protective care that extended beyond mere neighborly concern. Grace found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the profile of his face, the strength in his hands, the quiet confidence with which he moved through the world. Such thoughts were dangerous. She was an unwed mother-to-be, her reputation in tatters. He was a respected lawman with deep roots in the community. Whatever kindness he showed her was charity, nothing more, yet sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression that made her wonder if perhaps her feelings weren't entirely one-sided. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive air despite the harsh weather. The schoolchildren presented Grace with a handmade quilt for the baby, each family contributing a square. Even those parents who had initially objected to her teaching had come around, necessity and her evident skill overcoming moral objections. On Christmas Eve, snow fell heavily, transforming the landscape into a pristine white wonderland. Eleanor had spent days preparing a feast, and the main house glowed with the light of candles and a massive pine tree Quentin had cut from the forest. It's beautiful, Grace exclaimed, admiring the tree decorated with carved wooden ornaments, strings of dried berries, and small candles secured in tin holders. Family tradition, Quentin explained, pride evident in his voice. My father carved most of these ornaments. Eleanor brought out a small package wrapped in brown paper. This is for you. Grace opened it to find a pair of tiny knitted booties, clearly made with great care. Oh, Eleanor, they're perfect. Every baby needs warm feet, the older woman said gruffly, but her eyes were soft. Quentin cleared his throat. I have something as well. He disappeared into another room, returning with what appeared to be a piece of furniture covered with a blanket. When he pulled the cloth away, Grace gasped. A cradle, beautifully crafted of polished wood, rocked gently on curved runners. You made this, she whispered, running her fingers over the smooth surface. Been working on it evenings in the barn, wasn't sure if I'd finish in time. Grace felt tears well in her eyes. It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received. Every child deserves a proper place to sleep, he said, echoing his sister's sentiment. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotion, until Eleanor announced that supper was ready. They ate by candlelight, sharing stories and laughter that would have seemed impossible months earlier. After the meal, they gathered by the fire and Quentin read the Christmas story from the family Bible, his deep voice giving weight to the ancient words. When he reached the part about Mary and Joseph finding no room at the inn, Grace felt a particular resonance with the young woman facing childbirth in difficult circumstances. As the hour grew late, Alina retired, leaving Grace and Quentin alone by the fire. Snow continued to fall outside, muffling the world in white silence. "I should go back to my cabin," Grace said reluctantly, not wanting the evening to end. "Wait." Quentin reached into his pocket. "There's one more gift." He handed her a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I thought, for the baby, you could put a lock of hair inside or a tiny portrait someday." Grace stared at the beautiful piece, overwhelmed by the sentiment behind it. "I can't accept this. It's a family heirloom." "That's why I want you to have it." His eyes held her steadily. "For your child, Quentin." She hesitated, uncertain how to interpret his meaning. He moved closer, taking her hand in his. "Grace, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." Her heart pounded. "What is it?" "The baby's father, will he be coming back?" The question caught her off guard. "No, he made that quite clear before he left." "Does he know about the child?" "Yes, it didn't change his plans." Anger flashed in Quentin's eyes. What kind of man abandons his own blood? "The kind who values gold more than responsibility," Grace replied bitterly. "Thomas Bennett made grand promises, but when it came time to honor them..." She shrugged, the pain of betrayal still fresh despite the months that had passed. "Bennett," Quentin's voice sharpened. "Thomas Bennett, who worked at the livery stable?" Grace nodded, surprised. "You knew him?" "Of him. He had a reputation even before he left town." Quentin's jaw tightened. "There was talk he'd been married before back east, left a wife and children behind." The revelation hit Grace like a physical blow. "Married? He told me he was a widower." Men lie, especially when they want something from a woman. His face softened. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have told you like this." Grace felt a curious mix of pain and relief. Pain at having been so thoroughly deceived, relief at knowing the man she'd thought she loved had never been worthy of her feelings. "No, I'm glad to know the truth, even now." She touched the locket still in her palm. "Thank you for this, Quentin. I'll treasure it." As he walked her back to her cabin through the gently falling snow, his hand steady on her elbow, Grace found herself wondering what might have happened if she'd met Quentin Drake before Thomas Bennett had turned her head with pretty words and false promises. That night, lying in bed listening to the wind, Grace felt the baby kick vigorously, as if responding to her turbulent thoughts. She placed a hand on her belly, making a silent promise to her child that she would provide the love and stability she had so foolishly sought in the wrong man. New Year's Day dawned clear and cold. Grace woke early, feeling unusually energetic despite the advanced stage of her pregnancy. The baby had dropped lower in recent days, making breathing easier but walking more awkward. Dr. Wilson, grudgingly examining her after school the previous week, had confirmed everything appeared normal, though he'd delivered his assessment with the same disapproval he'd shown since learning of her condition. She dressed carefully in her warmest dress and made her way to the main house for breakfast, a daily ritual now that the snow made cooking in her separate cabin more challenging. "You're glowing this morning," Alina commented, setting a plate of hot cakes before her. "I feel well." "Better than I have in weeks." Grace poured maple syrup over her breakfast. "Where's Quentin?" Checking the north pasture. "One of the pregnant heifers was looking poorly yesterday. In this cold, cattle can't wait for fair weather." Alina sat across from her, sipping coffee. "He'll be back by midday." They spent the morning in comfortable companionship, Alina sorting through a trunk of baby things while Grace mended clothes. Around noon, the first pain struck sharper than the practice contractions she'd experienced before. "Alina," she said, keeping her voice calm, "I think the baby might be coming." The older woman's head snapped up. "Now, it's too early. Only by a few weeks. The doctor said that's not unusual for a first child." Another pain gripped her and Grace breathed through it as she'd been instructed. We should send for Dr. Wilson. Alina's face hardened. In this weather, it would take hours. Besides, that man's made no secret of his feelings about your situation. He's still a doctor. And I've delivered 6 babies in my time, including my own. Alina's voice softened. Trust me, Grace, I know what to do. The contractions continued through the afternoon, gradually increasing in frequency and intensity. Alina moved Grace to her own bed in the main house, deeming it warmer and more accessible than the cabin. Where is Quentin? Grace gasped during a particularly strong contraction. He should have returned by now. Worry flickered across Alina's face. The storm might have delayed him. Try not to fret. Men are useless at birthing anyway. As dusk fell, with no sign of Quentin and Grace's labor progressing rapidly, Alina sent the ranch hand who cared for the horses to search for her brother. The man returned an hour later, snow-covered and grim. Found the deputy's horse with a broken leg in a ravine, he reported. No sign of Mr. Drake, but there was blood in the snow. I followed tracks to an old line shack about 3 miles north, smoke coming from the chimney. He's injured, Alina concluded, and sheltering there. Appears so, madam. I'd have gone in, but with the storm worsening. You did right to return, Alina assured him. We need to focus on Miss Jennings now. Grace barely registered their conversation through the haze of pain. Her world had narrowed to the fierce work of bringing her child into the world. Yet even through her labor, worry for Quentin gnawed at her. Injured, alone in a storm, the dangers were tremendous. He'll be all right, Alina said, seeming to read her thoughts as she wiped Grace's brow with a cool cloth. Quinn's survived worse. The hours blurred together. Near midnight, with the new year just beginning, Grace's labor reached its peak. With Alina's steady guidance and encouragement, she pushed when instructed, rested when told, and finally felt the overwhelming release as her child slipped into the world. A boy, Alina announced, her voice thick with emotion. A strong, healthy boy. The sound of his first cry filled the room, high and indignant. Alina cleaned him quickly, wrapped him in a soft blanket, and placed him in Grace's arms. Hello, little one, Grace whispered, awestruck by the tiny face looking up at her. His eyes were dark blue, his wisps of hair sandy brown, and his features a perfect miniature that reminded her painfully of Thomas Bennett. Yet as she counted his fingers and toes, examined his round cheeks and button nose, she felt no regret, only fierce, protective love. What will you name him? Alina asked. Grace had considered many names over the months, but in this moment, only one felt right. Joshua. It means God is salvation, Alina nodded approvingly. A good, strong name. After ensuring both mother and baby were comfortable, Alina reluctantly left them to rest while she prepared a late supper. Grace dozed, her son sleeping peacefully beside her until a commotion downstairs woke her. Voices, urgent and concerned, heavy footsteps on the stairs. Then the bedroom door opened and Quentin appeared, supported by the ranch hand. His face was pale beneath a bloodied bandage wrapped around his forehead, and he favored his right leg. Grace, he breathed, his eyes finding her and then the small bundle beside her. The baby. A boy, she said, tears of relief filling her eyes. Joshua, he arrived at midnight. Quentin limped to the bedside, dismissing his helper with a nod of thanks. Carefully, he sat on the edge of the bed and reached out with tentative fingers to touch the baby's cheek. He's perfect, he murmured. What happened to you? Grace asked, noting the lines of pain around his eyes. Horse stepped in a hole hidden by snow. We both went down hard. I managed to make it to the line shack, but my leg, he grimaced. Pretty sure it's broken, splinted it best I could. You need a doctor. So I've been told. Alina's already sent for Wilson. His eyes never left the baby's face. Seems I missed all the excitement. There will be more, Grace assured him. Plenty of sleepless nights ahead. He smiled then, despite his obvious pain. I look forward to them. The simple statement, weighted with meaning, hung between them. Before Grace could respond, Alina entered with a tray of food and herbal tea. Quentin Drake, you look half dead, she scolded. What were you thinking, riding out in this weather? Had to check the heifers, he replied, the familiar sibling dynamic momentarily displacing the intensity of the moment. Cattle over your own safety, just like Pa, she set down the tray. Doctor. Wilson's on his way, said he'd come as soon as he finished with Mrs. Parker's influenza. The baby, Quentin began, I told him about the birth, said if there were no complications, the child could wait for examination. Her tone suggested what she thought of that assessment. Joshua and I are fine, Grace assured them both. It's Quentin who needs attention. Alina helped her brother to the adjoining bedroom, returning a few minutes later looking troubled. That leg's badly broken, she said quietly, and he's feverish from being out in the cold so long. Fear clutched at Grace's heart. How serious is it? Hard to say until the doctor arrives, but Quinn's strong, he'll pull through. Dr. Wilson arrived just before dawn, his demeanor as cold as the weather outside. He examined Joshua perfunctorily, grudgingly pronouncing him healthy before turning his attention to Quentin. Grace could hear his raised voice through the wall. This break is serious, Drake, might never heal properly. You could end up with a permanent limp if you're lucky, if infection sets in. She couldn't make out Quentin's reply, but the doctor's response was clear. 6 weeks minimum before you put weight on it, and that's being optimistic. When the doctor emerged, he glanced at Grace with barely concealed disdain. Your child appears healthy, Miss Jennings. A fortunate outcome considering the circumstances. Thank you for coming, doctor, she replied evenly. Didn't have much choice. Deputy Drake's well respected despite his associations. He packed his bag briskly. I'll return in a week to check both patients, keep the baby warm and fed. And make sure Drake stays off that leg completely for at least a month. After he left, Alina helped Grace to Quentin's room, carrying Joshua carefully. Quentin lay propped up in bed, his leg encased in a proper splint, his face flushed with fever but his eyes alert. The doctor says you'll recover, Grace said, settling in a chair beside his bed with Joshua in her arms. Eventually. His mouth twisted in a wry smile. Seems I'll be poor company for a while. We'll manage, Alina said firmly. Between the three of us and Mr. Peterson helping with the ranch work. 3 grown adults and a newborn, all needing care, Quentin mused. Quite a household we've become. There was something in his voice, a note of contentment, despite his pain that warmed Grace from within. She looked down at her son, then at the man watching them both with gentle eyes, and felt a sense of rightness she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to life at the Drake Ranch. Grace recovered quickly from childbirth, moving back to her cabin but spending most days in the main house. Joshua thrived, gaining weight and developing a strong pair of lungs that he exercised frequently at night. Quentin's recovery proved more challenging. The break was indeed severe, and though the fever subsided, pain kept him confined to bed longer than he'd anticipated. Frustration made him short-tempered at times, particularly when ranch matters required decisions he couldn't oversee personally. Should be out there, he muttered one February afternoon, watching from the window as Peterson directed the hands in breaking ice on the cattle pond. Man doesn't know the first thing about managing a herd in winter. He's following your instructions, Grace reminded him, nursing Joshua in the chair beside his bed, and doing a fine job from what Alina says. It's not the same as seeing for yourself. His gaze shifted to her and softened, though I can't complain about the company during my confinement. Grace felt her cheeks warm. Over the past weeks, she and Quentin had spent countless hours together as she read to him, helped with correspondence, or simply sat with Joshua while Alina tended to household matters. They'd talked of books, politics, their childhoods, everything except the growing attraction between them that even Alina had begun to notice, judging by her knowing glances. Joshua and I enjoy your company as well, Grace said carefully. Though I fear we're disrupting your recovery with our constant presence, on the contrary. You're what makes this bearable. He hesitated, then added quietly, I've been thinking, Grace, her heart quickened at his tone. About what? About the future. Yours and Joshua's and mine. Before he could continue, Alina burst into the room, her face alight with excitement. Letter from the school board. They want to know when Grace can return to teaching. The moment broken, Quentin leaned back against his pillows, a flicker of disappointment crossing his features. That's good news. Grace adjusted her clothing as Joshua finished nursing. I hadn't expected to return until spring. Says here they're willing to wait until March, but not longer. Substitute teachers leaving for California. Alina handed her the letter. March is just 3 weeks away, Grace mused. Joshua will be barely 2 months old. I'll care for him while you teach, Alina said immediately, as we agreed. And I'll be back on my feet by then, Quentin added. Dr. Wilson says I can start using crutches next week. Grace read the letter carefully. The salary offered was higher than before, a recognition of her value now that the town had experienced life without a qualified teacher. It would mean financial security for her and Joshua, independence she had feared lost forever after Thomas's abandonment. Yet as she looked between the Drake siblings, Alina with her gruff affection, Quentin with his steady support, she realized that returning to their original arrangement felt like a step backward rather than forward. I need to think about it, she said finally. There's much to consider. That night, after settling Joshua in his cradle, now moved to her cabin, Grace sat by the fire, turning the matter over in her mind. Teaching had been her salvation when she arrived in Redemption Creek, a way to support herself with dignity. But things had changed. She had changed. A knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Quentin standing there, balanced on crutches, his breath forming clouds in the cold night air. You shouldn't be out in this weather, she scolded, ushering him inside. Dr. Wilson said, damn what Wilson said. I needed to see you. He made his way to the fire, lowering himself carefully into a chair. We didn't finish our conversation earlier. Grace sat opposite him, heart racing. About the future. Yes. He set the crutches aside, leaning forward despite the obvious discomfort it caused. Grace, these past months, having you and Joshua here, it's changed things, changed me. Quentin, let me finish, please. He drew a deep breath. I know you came here because you needed help. I know your plan was always to regain your independence, return to teaching, make your own way. And if that's still what you want, I'll support you completely. But, she prompted, sensing there was more, but I find myself hoping you might consider another path. His eyes held hers, vulnerable yet determined. I love Joshua as if he were my own, and I love you, Grace. Have almost from the beginning, I think. The declaration, simple and heartfelt, brought tears to her eyes. You can't mean that. My situation, your situation is exactly why I respect you so much. Your courage, your dignity in the face of judgment and hardship. He reached for her hand. I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife, not out of necessity or convenience, but because I believe we could build something good together. The three of us, Grace stared at him, overwhelmed. The town would talk. They'd say you married me out of pity. Let them talk. They will regardless. A smile touched his lips. Besides, anyone who's seen us together these past months knows better. And Joshua, he's another man's child. He's your child, and he could be mine in every way that matters. Quentin's voice grew fierce. I would raise him as my own, Grace. Give him my name, my love, my protection. No one would ever need to know different if that's what you wanted. Joshua stirred in his cradle, whimpering softly. Grace rose automatically to check on him, lifting him into her arms. He quieted immediately, his tiny hand curling around her finger. What about your position as deputy? She asked. Marrying me could jeopardize that. Mayor already knows my intentions, says he doesn't give a damn who I marry as long as I keep the peace. Quentin smiled ruefully. His exact words were, about time you settled down, Drake. Town needs stability in its law enforcement. And Alina, how does she feel about this? Was her idea, if you can believe it, said we were both too stubborn to see what was right in front of us. He stood carefully, making his way to her side to look down at Joshua. She's grown quite attached to this little fellow, says being his aunt would suit her just fine. Grace looked up at Quentin, this man who had offered shelter when others turned away, who had defended her without question, who now offered his name and heart to her and her child. In his eyes she saw not pity or obligation, but genuine love, steady and certain. I don't want to return to teaching, she admitted. Not yet. I want to be with Joshua while he's small, but I don't want to be dependent. You wouldn't be. This would be a partnership, Grace. Your education, your skills are valuable to the ranch. You've already improved our bookkeeping considerably. He touched Joshua's cheek gently. And this little one will need proper schooling someday. Who better than his mother to provide it? The future he described unfolded in Grace's mind, a life at the ranch, raising Joshua with both a mother and father who loved him, contributing her skills to the family business, building something lasting together. "Yes," she whispered, her heart full. "Yes, I'll marry you, Quentin." His smile transformed his face, years falling away despite the lines of pain still evident around his eyes. He leaned down, mindful of the baby between them, and kissed her for the first time, a gentle, reverent touch that promised more to come. "When?" he asked when they parted. "As soon as you can stand without those crutches," she replied, practical even in her happiness. "I want you whole and healthy on our wedding day. That gives me incentive to heal quickly," he murmured, kissing her again. Spring arrived early that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the soil. By late March, Quentin had progressed from crutches to a walking stick, his limp noticeable but improving daily with exercise and determination. They were married on the first Sunday in April in the small church in Redemption Creek. The ceremony was simple, attended by a leaner, a few friends from town, and the mayor, who had insisted on standing as witness. Joshua, now 3 months old and growing rapidly, slept peacefully in Alina's arms throughout the service. "I, Quentin James Drake, take thee, Grace Elizabeth Jennings, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When Grace repeated the words, looking up into the face of this man who had changed her life so completely, she marveled at the unexpected journey that had brought her here. From disgrace and abandonment to love and acceptance, from lonely desperation to family and belonging. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and as Quentin kissed her, a cheer went up from those gathered. Even Martha Wilson, who had once refused to sell her flour, offered awkward congratulations at the small reception afterward. "Never thought I'd see the day Deputy Drake settled down," she commented. "Much less with—" She trailed off, apparently thinking better of her words. "With a woman of such intelligence and character," Quentin supplied smoothly, his arm firmly around Grace's waist. "I count myself fortunate indeed." Later, as they drove back to the ranch, now officially her home, Grace leaned against her husband's shoulder, Joshua sleeping in her lap. "Happy?" Quentin asked, kissing the top of her head. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "Though I keep expecting to wake and find this all a dream." "No dream." He guided the horses around a bend in the road. "Though I've been thinking we should make some changes to the cabin, expand it a bit." "Oh, why is that?" His smile was both tender and mischievous. "Joshua might want siblings someday, a proper family." Grace laughed, joy bubbling up from deep within. "That sounds wonderful, though perhaps we should enjoy being newlyweds for a while first." "I like the way you think, Mrs. Drake." As they crested the hill overlooking the ranch, the setting sun gilded everything in gold, much as it had the day she first arrived. But now, instead of uncertainty and fear, Grace felt only contentment and anticipation for the future they would build together. "Look, Joshua," she whispered to her sleeping son. "We're home." In the years that followed, the Drake Ranch prospered and grew. Quentin eventually resigned as deputy to focus fully on ranching, his leg healing well enough for most activities, though the limp remained. Grace established a small school on the property that served both their growing family and neighboring ranchers' children. Joshua grew into a strong, confident boy with his mother's intellect and his adoptive father's sense of justice. He never questioned his place in the family, especially after the arrival of his sister Emma 2 years after his parents' marriage, followed by brothers Daniel and Samuel in the years that followed. On Joshua's 10th birthday, Grace and Quentin sat together on the porch, watching their children play in the summer twilight. Alina, now married to the widower Peterson, called them in for cake, her voice still carrying the same gruff affection but softened by contentment. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked quietly, her hand finding Quentin's as it had countless times over the years. taking on another man's child, facing the gossip. Quentin watched as Joshua, tall for his age and showing signs of the man he would become, helped his younger siblings construct an elaborate fort from fallen branches. "Not for a single moment," he replied, squeezing her hand. "He may not have my blood, but he has my heart, same as you." "Same as all our children." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, thinking of the frightened, desperate young woman she had been and the journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect peace. "I love you, Quentin Drake," she said simply. "And I love you, Grace Drake," he replied, the words as fresh and true as the first time he'd spoken them. Together they rose to join their family, moving forward into the future they had built from courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that love in all its forms was worth fighting for.